Here we're going to go through the species effects on ecosystem properties. We're going to start by the way that species impact biogeochemistry. Species traits that influence nutrient inputs or losses have important ecosystem effects. So we said that those species that impact interactive controls the most are most likely to impact ecosystem processes. And one of those important interactive controls is really nutrient inputs and losses. A classic example is to think about nitrogen-fixing plants and their presence in an ecosystem. One of the examples that the authors use comes from Hawaii. And in Hawaii, if you take a look at it, so this is on the Big Island here, that you can have craters and there'll be lava flows that are unvegetated, but there's large amounts of tropical forests that are present. Now, looking at those tropical forests, a lot of them might appear to be pretty similar. But we can take a look at, with remote sensing technology, differences in foliar nitrogen concentrations, and see that some areas have relatively high nitrogen concentrations and others are low. So what are the differences between these two sites? Are these soils inherently more fertile than these? Well, it turns out that those differences that we see in foliar nitrogen concentration and everything that would go along with it, such as photosynthetic rates and carbon gain, really have to do with the presence and absence of just one species. So that species is of the genus Morella, which used to be Myrica, but Morella phaea is a nitrogen-fixing tree. When that nitrogen-fixing tree, Morella, is absent, the amount of nitrogen that's being input into the system is a lot less than when it's present. So the nitrogen fixer adds a lot more nitrogen to the system. As a consequence, the mineralization rate of nitrogen is a lot lower if it's absent, and litter nitrogen concentrations are lower too. So having that nitrogen fixer present, the litter that enters into the soil has higher nitrogen concentration, and we'll see a lot higher nitrogen mineralization rate present also. All of that comes from the differences in fixation, and simply having a single species that can fix nitrogen increases the inputs, mineralization rates, litter nitrogen concentrations, as well as foliar nitrogen concentrations that we saw in the previous slide. Another example of a categorical difference among species and their functional traits is really their depth of rooting. So we know that for plants that are relatively shallowly rooted versus those that are more deeply rooted, being deeply rooted allows you to access a lot greater volume of soil, but not all species are able to produce roots to the same depth. One of the introductions in California was of eucalyptus trees. And eucalyptus differ in a number of ways from the native species that would be present in those ecosystems. And these are often annual grasslands or shrub-dominated systems. And you can see just from looking at it, having eucalyptus present leads to much larger biomass and much larger productivity than the ecosystems that don't have eucalyptus in it. So this is a comparison of ecosystem processes between two different communities that really just differ in their rooting depth. There's an annual grassland, which is here, and a forest. Now both of these are dominated quite often by non-native species. So the difference isn't whether it's native or non-native, but it's a difference in the traits. So these annual grasslands, when they're dominated by annual grasses, have a lot lower productivity than the eucalyptus forest. You get a lot less litter than when there's eucalyptus, and it decomposes a lot more slowly in the eucalyptus than the grass. So some of these processes that we think of as being important for ecosystems, such as net primary productivity, litter mass, and litter turnover, are radically altered by the introduction of a species. Now, eucalyptus differs in a large number of ways compared to grasses, but one of the ways is really the depth of the rooting and the ability to access different nutrient pools.